"Oh, it hurts. I can't take it anymore."
Daniel collapsed as he said this. "Don't just stand there. Call an ambulance." Susan panicked. No, I don't want to. I answered like that. My name is Emily, and I'm turning 29 this year. I work at a design office, assisting with image editing. Basically, my job is to process images and do some design work. It's not that the pay is bad, but the hours don't really match up with the salary. Well, that's pretty common in this industry. I too got married last year before hitting 30. My husband Daniel is a year older, 30 years old. Daniel is an accountant. He's from a completely different world than I am. And Daniel's dad is a high-profile lawyer. Daniel's parents' home is filled with professionals like lawyers and doctors, and the guests at our wedding all had rather stern faces. They're not bad people, but I tend to avoid casual conversation with them. On the opposite end, I graduated from design school, and all my friends are quite flashy. Our reception was color divided down the middle, as if marking territories. Everyone thought I was marrying up with someone like Daniel, but that's not really the case. Even as an accountant, unless you open your own practice, you don't make that much money. Daniel only managed to pass his national exam after 4 attempts, putting him at a lower status among accountants. Of course, he hasn't started his own practice. His days are filled with organizing documents for senior accountants at a firm owned by a friend of his father-in-law. My job, helping designers and meticulously cropping images, is pretty much the same as his. But together, we make enough money, and being an accountant is a stable job. In an industry like mine, where the highs are highs and the lows are devastating, marrying Daniel felt like a blessing. Our married life is quite busy, with hardly any time spent together. We only see each other in the evenings and mornings, and we rarely eat together. But we're young, and I suppose this is just what it's like for dual-income couples. However, it wasn't quite the same for Daniel. I guess married life wasn't what he had imagined. As the marriage passed the half-year mark, the complaints and snide comments started. Given his profession, he always approached discussions with pure logic. Honestly, though, they sounded like nothing but unreasonable excuses. Even his way of speaking seemed logical, but came across as utterly self-centered.
"Hey, is breakfast ready yet?"
"Didn't you ask last night what we'd do for breakfast? You didn't decide then, so how could it be ready?"
"I decided a moment ago, didn't I?"
"A moment ago isn't literally just now. Do you really think I can prepare it that quickly?"
"You're useless, I swear. You wouldn't last a day in my office."
"I'm not an employee at your office, Daniel."
"Don't sweat the small stuff. Are you talking back to me now?"
Yeah. I've got to head out soon, so I've left this and this out for you. Just plate it and eat whatever you fancy."
"You expect me to do it? This is because your planning is terrible, right?"
"My planning? Maybe if you could make a decision for once."
"What a nasty woman, always having to have the last word."
I left the house listening to Daniel's complaints. Before we married, Daniel said,
"I'll share the housework. We both work, it's only fair. I won't make much money at first, so Emily, I need you to work hard too."
And now, share the workload? There's none. Help? Not at all. It's expected that I should take care of him. His attitude has become archaic after marriage. And then there's always the comparison with his mother, Susan.
"My mom did all the household work, without a word of complaint. And then there's you, Emily. All excuses and shoddy work because of your job. Aren't you embarrassed?"
"That's rich. I do my share of the housework. What do you mean by household work? Just looking after you, right? We both work, so why don't you take care of your own stuff? Before we were married, you were all about sharing chores. How about we forgive the household duties and you manage your own affairs?"
"What did you say?" "Forget it."
These exchanges had become routine. Sighing, I convinced myself that even couples who seem happy on the outside probably have their issues too. And then something happened to make me feel even worse. Once again, it was mother-in-law Susan. After such arguments, or rather exchanges with Daniel, it was inevitable that I'd hear from Susan.
"Emily, I heard from Daniel. What's this about you not making him meals?"
"Susan, did Daniel tell you that? I don't want to speak ill of him, but the fault lies with Daniel."
"How could you, his wife, blame Daniel?"
Can we talk later? I've got a meeting starting soon." So tiresome, the same thing over and over. To be honest, I'm not fond of my parents-in-law's house. Father-in-law is a highly respected veteran lawyer, known as the acquittal artisan, and mother-in-law was a housewife raised in an upper-class family. In a house where the busy father-in-law was hardly ever present, she and Daniel lived a life of indulgence. On the contrary, father-in-law has always been strict with Daniel, scolding him properly even now when necessary. Father-in-law, a sought-after lawyer nationwide, often travels to courts far away and frequently leaves home on business trips. When he does, Susan still summons Daniel back to his parents' house. "Today, since Daniel's on a business trip, I'm going to make your favorite curry. Hurry home." "Thanks, Mom. I'll be right there." Back when we were dating, before we got married, Daniel kept this spoiled side of him hidden. So it came as a real shock to me when, after we got married, I was confronted with this mama's boy persona, especially during meals at my parents-in-law's house. If the timing was right, I used to join them. The table was always laden with more food than we could possibly eat. Daniel always started eating first. If I tried to eat before him, Susan would invariably scold me. "Emily, what are you doing? You need to wait until Daniel has finished eating. You're supposed to take care of your husband's leftovers. That's what daughters-in-law do." Hearing this, Daniel would just smile and nod, seemingly pleased. Once Daniel finished, the women would start their meal. All I could hear while eating was Susan's endless talk about how the wife of Daniel should be, how to support and care for him. Even as I ate, the food seemed tasteless amidst such conversation. And after meals, I wasn't allowed to relax. While Daniel sat back with a beer in hand, happy as can be, I was handed a shopping list by Susan and sent out to run errands. I wasn't even allowed to use the front door. "The wife of Daniel uses the back door," she would say. By the time I finished all of Susan's errands, I was completely exhausted. That's how terribly uncomfortable it was at my parents-in-law's house. However, since I often had to work on weekends, and I didn't go there all the time, I just resigned myself to thinking of it as a form of endurance. But lately, I've noticed a change in Daniel. He started stopping by his parents' house after work on weekdays, and on weekends, he'd say he was staying over at their house, hardly spending any time at our own home. It started to seem suspicious. Feeling a bit doubtful, I sometimes called my parents-in-law's house. Sure enough, Daniel was there. Nothing overtly suspicious seemed to be going on, but something else was strange. Now, on occasions, when it seemed I could join them at my parents-in-law's house, Susan, who had previously worked me to the bone, started saying things like, "Emily, why don't you take it easy and rest on the weekends?" As someone who disliked their parents-in-law's house, I was actually pleased with this change. So in the end, Daniel was the one who went off to my in-laws' house alone. That's how it continued for a while. Our home and my parents-in-law's house are about a 30-minute drive apart. We only have one car, which we both use. Daniel uses it every time he goes to my parents-in-law's house. I can get to work just by taking the bus, so I rarely use the car, except for shopping. And since Daniel commutes by train, the only time he uses the car is for his visits to his parents' house. One day, I went shopping alone, in that car. Then, I noticed a long strand of hair on the passenger seat. Huh? I have a short haircut, and this long hair isn't mine. I don't remember letting anyone else in the car. Could it be? Is he cheating? While I had that thought, I also wondered when he would have the time. Lately, Daniel has mostly been at my parents-in-law's house, except for work. He spends weekends there too, and there's no sign of him going out at night, so it doesn't seem like he has the time to cheat. So I asked Daniel about it. "Hey, you've been hanging out at Susan's place a lot recently. What are you up to?" Why are you asking me that all of a sudden?" "Well, you're there on weekdays, and even stay over on weekends. I was just wondering what you do all the time."
"It's nothing much, just relaxing, studying. There's a lot of law books at the parents' house, right? Even as an accountant, I need to have a broad knowledge, so I study there."
You're quite the studious one, aren't you?"
Yeah, I guess."
Something feels off. Come to think of it, Daniel has been complaining less to me recently, and there are no calls from Susan either. It was a relief until recently, but now it seems suspicious. With a firm resolve, I decided to hire a detective to investigate Daniel for infidelity. A few days later, I received the investigation report.
"Emily, to get straight to the point, Daniel has been seen with a young woman with long hair."
Ah, I knew it.
However, what's strange is that he seems to only accompany her to his parents' house.
To the parents' house?
Therefore, we couldn't confirm any infidelity. As a precaution, I will report his movements. Daniel always meets this woman on his way to the parents' house, lets her in the car, and then they head to the house. There's no evidence of infidelity or anything similar happening in the car. After arriving at the parents' house, given that the mother-in-law is there, we don't believe that an affair is taking place. That's our conclusion.
So you're saying there's no definitive evidence of an affair, but at least he's meeting this woman frequently?
Exactly. If they were meeting anywhere else, it might be a different story, but since it's the parents' house, it's difficult for us to investigate further.
The detective's reasoning seemed solid, but when it comes to Daniel and his family, what's normal for others might not apply to them. That's what I thought. One day, I started a certain plan. This weekend, I'll be going to Seattle for a shoot, so I'll be away.
All right, then I'll go back to the parents' house alone.
Sure, say hi to Susan for me. After watching Daniel leave from my parents-in-law's house by car, I took a taxi and headed to their house ahead of him. As I expected, I arrived first, so I decided to watch from the back of my parents-in-law's house. Eventually, Daniel's car with a woman arrived. At the entrance, Susan greeted them with a happy smile. Welcome! You two always look so good together.
You're making me blush, Mom.
Oh, Daniel, are you blushing? That's cute. Come on in. We have a feast prepared for today. As they interacted, after entering the parents-in-law's house, I retrieved the back door key of their house from the car. I always use this car for shopping for my parents-in-law's house, so I left the back door key in it. I quietly unlocked the back door and entered the house. No one was in the kitchen, but I could faintly hear the shower running from the shower room. I peeked into the shower room. There, I found the woman's clothes and underwear from earlier. Indeed, she was the mistress. Who else takes a shower in a stranger's home so suddenly? Daniel was meeting his mistress at his parents' house, and Susan was helping them. Contempt over anger. That was the emotion I felt towards them. What kind of messed up family conspires in adultery together? First, I made sure the mistress couldn't escape by starting the washing machine with the clothes and underwear I found in the shower room. This way, the mistress had nothing to change into. Alerted by the noise, the mistress called out from the shower. Daniel, what is it? Can't wait? Even with your wife around, you're really eager, aren't you? It seems this mistress knew Daniel was married. If she knew and still engaged with him, it was clearly an affair. Excuse me, who might you be? I'm Daniel's wife. The mistress froze in shock. She'd be stuck, naked for a while. Leaving the shower room, I headed to Daniel's room upstairs. I knocked furiously on the door, shouting, Daniel, you're in there, aren't you? I kicked the door open, but the room was already empty. All I saw was an open window. Looking outside, I saw a man running, nearly falling. Such foolishness. Daniel must have jumped out in a panic. He must have hurt himself somewhere. Clutching at his arm and chest, he got away. Well, it's fine. This is my parents-in-law's house. He only has their house or his own home to return to. He'll come back here, I thought. I went downstairs to the living room. Susan, who was sitting there elegantly, was very surprised to see me.
Emily, you were here.
Yes, I told Daniel earlier. Didn't you hear? Susan was in a fluster, sweat visibly unable to stop. She kept nervously checking towards the shower room behind the kitchen. Naturally, the mistress was there. From Susan's perspective, it would be terrible if the mistress showed up here. But no worries, the mistress couldn't come out. The table was set with a lavish meal. Susan, this meal is amazing. I'm sorry you went to all this trouble for me.
Oh, well, I wanted to do something special for you, Emily.
I went upstairs to call Daniel for dinner, but he wasn't there. Is it okay if I start eating? Of course, of course. Go right ahead. I wonder where Daniel could have gone off to. Susan hurriedly dialed Daniel's number. Ah, Daniel, your dinner is getting cold. Please hurry back. What? Are you okay? Yes, I'm fine here. I'd usually be left with Daniel's leftovers, but today I indulged to my heart's content. Then, as if nothing had happened, Daniel appeared.
Oh, Emily, you were here.
Yes, my business trip got canceled suddenly. You saw my WhatsApp message, didn't you? I hadn't actually sent any message, but that was beside the point. Daniel looked really worried. He was protecting his upper body, maybe in pain. It must have been from a fall. Daniel, aren't Susan's dishes delicious? Aren't you going to eat? I might just finish everything here. At first, Daniel seemed unconcerned, but soon his face turned pale, and he was sweating profusely. Susan, perhaps preoccupied with the mistress, seemed unaware of Daniel's condition. The mistress, it seems, was quietly hiding in the shower room. Click. Turning towards the sound, I saw Daniel, pale as a ghost, dropping his knife and fork.
It hurts. I can't take it anymore. Ugh.
With a groan, he collapsed. Susan screamed out, Daniel, what's wrong, Daniel? Oh dear, Daniel, you were really hurt, weren't you? Your shoulder is all twisted. Emily, don't just stand there. Call an ambulance. What? No, I don't think so. I responded with a slight laugh. Why don't you ask the mistress, hiding in the shower room, to call for help? Susan looked even more shocked. How do you know that? I'm full, and I'll be leaving now. Emily, acting like this when you're Daniel's wife. Susan, please don't treat me as Daniel's wife anymore, okay? You know everything, right? Saying that, I pulled out a recorder from my pocket. As I pressed play, the mistress's voice filled the room. Daniel, what? You can't wait? Even with your wife around? You're so eager. It was an annoyingly sweet voice. Susan turned bright red and looked down. Defeated, she called the ambulance herself. Soon after, we could hear the siren of the ambulance. The paramedics were administering first aid, and while Daniel regained consciousness, he couldn't talk or walk due to the intense pain and was carried out on a stretcher. I had no intention of accompanying him, so I headed to my car. Just as I was leaving, a middle-aged couple rushed in with great urgency.
What's going on here? Are you holding my daughter captive? She called us for help.
They seemed to notice the ambulance.
What's this ambulance for? What happened?
It appeared to be the mistress's parents-in-law. The mistress must have called for help using the mobile phone she left in the shower room. But to lie about being locked in, well, this mistress wasn't your average person either. Daniel and Susan hung their heads low in shame.
Where is my daughter? Aren't you her fiancé? What's this about being held captive?
The mistress's dad pressed in on Daniel, who was on the stretcher. It seemed he just then became aware of my presence.
Excuse me, who are you?
Me? I'm Daniel's wife.
What? That can't be right. Daniel is supposed to be single.
No, Daniel is my husband. The confusion was written all over the mistress's parents-in-law's faces.
Daniel, you had a family? You were seeing my daughter while married?
Without heeding the paramedics' restraint, mistress's dad yanked Daniel from the stretcher.
Father-in-law, it hurts. It's really painful.
He might have had a broken shoulder or ribs for all we knew. Daniel wailed in pain. Mistress's mom was also screaming. This isn't what we agreed on. Susan, what is going on? It's not like that. It's different. While witnessing the hellish scene, I left my parents-in-law's house. Of course, I never went there again. Later, my divorce from Daniel was finalized. I demanded alimony from Daniel, Susan, and the mistress in the divorce proceedings. I had been curious why the mistress's mom was so familiar with Susan, but it turned out Susan disliked me indeed, introducing Daniel to a friend's daughter. She had lied that Daniel was a once-divorced bachelor at the time. Law is a tricky beast. It turned out that Susan's tolerating Daniel's infidelity didn't seem to qualify as a reason for claiming compensation. So I claimed for the repeated emotional abuse from Susan instead. The emotional abuse that the parents-in-law claimed by their daughter was as ignorant as they were about Daniel's marriage, just deceived. But when I played the audio from the shower room, they agreed to a lump sum compensation. Emotional abuse she knew about Daniel's ongoing marriage when she started seeing him. Yet driven by a desire to marry an accountant like Daniel, she dove into the affair. As expected, Daniel and Susan refused to pay the compensation. So I turned to father-in-law's office for resolution. That seemed to do the trick, and they paid up promptly. Father-in-law, upon learning all this, was furious. He divorced Susan quickly and cut ties with Daniel. Daniel had always lived under father-in-law's management. He had to quit the accounting firm and, Unable to find another job, he's now apparently working part-time at some restaurant. All that effort to pass the exams and get his qualification 4 times over seems pretty foolish now. Susan apparently started a part-time job too, both living a life of poverty. Now I reflect on my inability to judge people correctly. That feeling of discomfort at the wedding never did go away. Recently, I've been given more responsibility in design. First things first, work. I'm building a life where I don't have to worry about my partner's title, just living my life, and today, as always, I keep pushing forward.